Our special guest on Podcast Unlocked this week is none other than Rod Fergusson. You know him as the right hand of Cliff Bleszinski during the early years
the things he does with his right hand, I do not want to be associated with.
You know what? He was just in here. That's probably fair. All right, so we'll move on past that. You were the fixer at Irrational Games on BioShock Infinite. You had a brief detour over to 2K Marin for some stuff, which I wanted to ask you about in a second.
It's more of a journey of finding myself. Some people backpack across Europe or walk through, Australia. I just switched around game companies for a couple of years.
Yeah, and now you're at the newly renamed the Coalition, formerly Black Tusk, and you are working on all things Gears of War related, starting with Gears of War 4.
Correct.
Which we just played. You'll see by the time this airs, the coverage will all be up on IGN. And there are worse ways to spend an afternoon than spending like 3 hours playing Gears of War 4's multiplayer beta. So, Rod, the first thing I wanted to ask you was about backtracking a second. You have a big history with the series, but then you headed off and you were very much credited with helping get BioShock Infinite done and out the door, which turned out to be a great game. Mm-hmm. And then you were working on what the rumor was Mafia 3.
Right.
So what led to you not working on that anymore? Because that's a big series too. That's been sort of in development for a long time. The third one.
It's just sort of a misalignment of goals. I think is probably the easiest way to say it. It's just and so I realized that what I was looking for and what they wanted were not necessarily the same things. And so I decided that it was probably best for me to leave. And it was and it worked out crazy because I left 2K and then. I phoned a friend of mine at Microsoft and said, hey, I've left 2K and I want to start my own game studio. Do you want to come with me? And he was like, wait, what? And I said, yeah, I left 2K. And he goes, well, we're looking to get Gears. So if you're free, that changes a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, oh, you're getting Gears? Okay, that sounds great. And so,
well, that was my next question. So was that serendipitous where it just kind of worked out?
Yeah, I didn't know that Microsoft was getting it until I phoned them. Like I said, I phoned my friend to say that I was going to form my own company. And he was like, hey, you should come and do this. And I was like, in a minute. Because I still wanted to keep working on Gears even at Epic, and it was only when Epic said, we're putting this on the shelf, we're going to do other things, that I was like, okay, I think it's time for me to go then.
So I'm curious. So you actually were at Microsoft producing, if I remember correctly, on the Microsoft side with Gears 1.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I'd been on the Gears title for 6 months as the Microsoft producer, and I was seeing that they were having struggles, and so that was one of the things where I said, and I had just come off Counter-Strike Xbox, where we had basically had to pull that entire game in-house. So that was really my first experience of doing being the lead producer for internal development as opposed to being a publishing producer. Mm-hmm. And I really got a taste for it. Like once you do it, it was like, oh, that's what I want to do. And so I went back to being a publishing producer for 6 months, and I just looked at Epic and they're really struggling on the production side. I think I could really help, and plus that's what I really want to do with my career. And so it was an interesting conversation with my wife where because I'd already gone through the process, and then I signed the deal and all this stuff, and she was like, wait a second. You're leaving a company of 63,000 to go be employee number 63. Like, we could have the entire company in our front yard for a barbecue. And I'm like, yeah. And she was, are you crazy? It's like, fortunately, I'd already signed, so she had no way to make me sign.
So you were, of course, you worked on Gears pretty much all the way through. And
for 7 years.
I'm curious, when you take the Coalition gig and lead the new generation of Gears of War, do you call Cliff, since that was his baby? Do you kind of look for his blessing, or
no?
I mean, I'm just curious. I don't know how it works,
Yeah, no. I mean, Cliff's doing his own thing with Lawbreakers, and it was clear, Cliff had moved on. So I was like, it was one of the things I really wanted to make sure that the Coalition felt like it owned its own vision. Yeah. So I snuck some concept art to Chris Perna early on to say, like, dude, what do you think? Because Chris is really the monster guy, and so I was just like, what, is this cool to you? Because it's cool to me. And he came back with really positive stuff, and so I was really excited about that. But no, I haven't talked to Cliff about the game specifics at all. I mean, the one thing we did do, because we had to start right away. Because when I got there, Black Tusk had been working on another game, so we had a pretty large. We didn't have a 10-person pre-production team. We had a pretty fully staffed up team. So we were just looking at what's the quickest way to get going. And so I flashed back to what we had done 3 years previous, where we'd done some pre-production work on Gears 4 at Epic. And so there's some elements there that we're like, oh, there's an interesting character name, and there's an interesting monster name, and there's some concepts that we think maybe we could develop. And so that was one of the things where instead of going okay, let's start fresh and reimagine everything, we're just like, hey, there was some stuff that I really liked when I was at Epic. Let's just start there. And then within 2 weeks we had a story. And then the monster started to fall out of that. It was a great sort of like, hey, I already have an idea. Let's go.
That's crazy because Gears 4 is one of the rare titles where it was announced the day you started working on it, because Microsoft buys the IP and then you're like, okay, well, here we go. We're going to start now. We got Unreal Engine 4 and and we're off.
Right.
So, and it'll end up being about 3 years on the game, right? By the time it ships.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing. It's like and we're starting fresh. Like when you look at Gears 1, I mean, Gears 1, honestly, was a 5 to 6 year title by the time they went through all the iterations. And it started as Warfare. It was a Battlefield competitor, and then it changed midway through to become a story-based game. And so there was a lot of effort went into that. So for us to go from nothing, like a new engine, new team, no concept, like, on day one in January 2014, to go from that to, okay, now we're shipping, like, that was why I took some of the shortcuts. It's like, we don't have time to go on some mystic journey of exploration. We have some good ideas already about JD Phoenix and about a bunch of other stuff. Let's just start executing.
So I'm curious, how did you feel about the E3 reveal last year?
So in the moment, it felt great. And post it, I realized we had kind of gone too far. Like, one of the things I try to push for people, like one of my philosophies is, don't do anything halfway.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we're doing stuff, like, either when you're like trying to show a feature off, I'm either keep it gray box and simple so people know that it's a work in progress, or finish it, but don't find some middle ground where people are uncertain about what it is they're seeing. And what had happened is that we wanted to do an announcement, and normally an announcement would be, here's a logo, maybe a piece of voiceover, like look at their GDC, the black on red thing, right? We weren't ready. The art wasn't ready. The texture, I mean, that's why it's black and red, is because the textures weren't, we just weren't done. And so that was the true tease. And we, in our development of going through from pre-production into production, we had built this little visual target test for ourselves. And we're like, this visual target is actually coming up really nicely. Like, we like how it looks and it has a good sense of the tone. I'm like, instead of teasing people with just a logo and a voiceover, why don't we just blow their minds by having something really cool with our visual target? And so we were all bought into that. And so we went and in my mind, and I played that live on stage, and I was like, this is going to be awesome. And what ended up happening is people didn't, because it was so polished, nobody took it as a tease. People said, oh, this is a demo of gameplay.
Right.
They all misinterpreted what it was. Instead of going like, holy crap, that's the best looking tease I've ever seen, they were like, that gameplay doesn't look like Gears of War to me. It's a little slower pace, like, in terms of, because we walked down the street and we weren't doing a lot of fighting and that kind of stuff. And so I think that was where I would go, in hindsight, I felt like we'd done a halfway thing again. Like, we weren't so limited on, it was just an image with a voiceover, so very minimalist, or it wasn't a full demo, that we picked this middle ground. And probably in hindsight, I wouldn't do that.
So let's talk about the 30 frames per second campaign, 60 frames multiplayer decision that you guys made. So I'm all for it, because to me, part of what makes Gears is it just blows me away from a technical visual perspective.
Right.
I tweeted out my opinion and got a surprising, like, there is a huge polarization on this, at least from my Twitter sample size audience.
Right. So both of them were upset? That's
yeah, well, but so I'm curious if you wouldn't mind kind of elaborating on that decision, including what benefits you're going to get, what tangible on the screen benefits you're going to get from players. Because I think there's a lot of, maybe I'm projecting here, but a lot of younger generation players that have kind of more come up on Call of Duty, and they've been told, well, 60 frames is great and anything less is horrible. In fact, that's what they tweeted me, like, anything less than 60 is terrible. Like, well, aren't you all playing Destiny right now?
Right.
But so, yeah, I'm curious if you can elaborate on the decision a bit.
Oh, sure. Well, it's just about that, right? It's the notion of wanting to to push the visuals as hard as possible in the campaign. And so, and there's also other aspects. Like, when you look at your frame rate, there's a number of elements that go into it. Part of it is rendering, right? So there's GPU constraints that once you start to do, everything you do on the screen eats up milliseconds to the point where now you're getting down to it. And things like scene density and how much stuff you're drawing and all those sorts of things, and the quality of the textures and that resolution of the textures. So there's a GPU side, but there's also a CPU side. And so by the number of monsters you want on screens, the amount of AI that's running is going to eat up your CPU, which is going to slow you down too.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's actually easier for us to do 60 in multiplayer and 30 in campaign, is because in multiplayer you really don't have the AI dependencies that you have in single player. And you can make multiplayer arenas be a little bit cleaner in terms of not having to have the same object density, and you can kind of scale some of that stuff back. So for us, it was like what's most important to us in the campaign has always been to blow people's minds visually. And then but when you're playing competitively in a multiplayer, obviously responsiveness is most important, and that's why we wanted to push 60. So we felt like that was the right trade-off, is to push visuals in campaign and to push responsiveness in multiplayer.
All right, so Marcus Fenix is the next guy I want to ask you about.
Okay.
It's really seems to be really hard to create an iconic hero.
Right.
And you guys did that
Right.
with the original Gears series.
Right.
And, when 343 took over Halo,
Right.
they didn't leave Chief behind.
Sure.
They kind of are with 5, but that's another story entirely.
Right.
So you've made the decision to seemingly not have Marcus Fenix, unless
Right.
you're pulling some sort of red herring on me, which
Right.
I wouldn't mind. So is Marcus in the game, and do you feel like there's a risk leaving him behind if in fact that is the case?
Well, I mean, clearly it's a risk, right? I mean, one of the things for us was when we looked at where we were in the next game, there was a choice of whether to do it easy or do it right. So to do it easy, especially given where I had a new team, a new engine, all this stuff, was to say, like, okay, Gears 4, we were wrong. The Locusts are back, and it's Marcus and the squad, and it's 3 weeks later or 6 months later,
right.
And it's basically the same game, but with a few more features and that kind of stuff. And we felt like that's an easy way to do it, but it doesn't give us that sort of a foundation to go even further into the future. And so for us, when we looked at it, we said, what we need is to build a foundation for a saga that we can go someplace and explore. And like a prequel didn't make sense because we kind of bang into your own game. An alternate planet didn't make sense because you kind of lose what makes Gears. Like Sarah isn't meaningful, and we even talked about an origin story, but then it becomes the Spider-Man thing, and I don't want another Marcus Fenix, right? So for us, that idea of creating these younger heroes, these 25-year-olds, where now through games you can actually develop them and create their character. Like Marcus is a late 40s, character. He's kind of set. His personality, notice Marcus doesn't really change. The world changes around Marcus, but Marcus doesn't really change. And so building a foundation of new cast means we have a lot of places where we can go now, and we can actually see these characters change and develop as we play through the saga that will be the future of Gears. So
for me, one reason I asked you about how you thought the reveal went at E3 is because I'm a person who's a Gears of War fan, and I wasn't as excited as I wanted to be by the reveal, and part of that was I just didn't get a sense of JD being super interesting. Of course, there's virtually like no dialogue, so there's a bit of trade-off there. But first impressions count, right?
Oh,
so
totally.
I'm curious what's sort of going into what are you guys doing to try and make JD a compelling, interesting character, the same way that there's some magic formula that made Marcus good.
Well, I mean, part of it is I think so there's a bunch of things going through my head
to
answer that. So I mean, part of it is that I think some people forget about where we started. So when I talk to people about Delta Squad, people go like brothers to the end and all the da-da-da. I'm like, have you played Gears 1 lately? Because Marcus and Baird hated each other, and Dom was always talking about knocking out his teeth and calling each other. Like, they were not friends.
Right.
And it took going through 1, 2, and 3 to get to where they got to, where people were like, oh, brothers to the end, Delta Squad. And yeah, that took 3 games, guys. Like, that wasn't image 1, right? Frame 1. And so for us, too, is just like the notion of, we had no time for backstory in Gears 1. When I came onto that, we didn't have a story, and we had content, but we didn't know where we were going with it. And so we didn't have time to really develop it. So really we went after archetypes. And even like initially it was Cole was the scientist, and Baird was the sports hero, and we tried all these things, and just because it didn't register right away, we ended up kind of simplifying it to these archetypes of like, oh, okay, any given Sunday football guy, got it, right? And our goal in terms of trying to make the story and the characters more contemporary, like 10 years later, is to look at, well, look, to me, this is not a great comparison, but the Tim Burton to Christopher Nolan thing. Like, Tim Burton Batman is very much, it's the comic book, and Christopher Nolan has a lot more nuance.
True.
And so we'll never be as dark as a Christopher Nolan Dark Knight, but the notion of there's more gray in their stories, and there's more things to learn about, and there's more nuance. So it's not like I can sit here and go, here's my 3-word summary of JD as a character. I can't do that because there's more to JD than that. And plus, he's young, so my hope is that through the future games that he'll actually crystallize and form in your mind. So for me, it's about Gears 4 is about going on a journey of discovery. You're discovering this new monster. This is the emergence day for the swarm. You're the first person to ever see the monster, and you get to play that and discover that. And as part of that, you'll also discover these 3 characters and their relationships and who they actually are. So it's not just a one-sided discovery. And so it's kind of, you have to play it. And I know that's hard from you haven't sold them to me yet.
Right.
But that's part of what, like I would prefer not to market this game at all if I could get people to buy it without marketing it, because I didn't want to reveal the swarm.
Yeah, a lot of developers are that way, right? Just like play it when it's done.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like, hey, we're going to market the Sixth Sense and say there's ghosts or something. Like, I don't want to do that, right?
What?
Yeah, spoiler. And so the notion of I wanted to hold the swarm back because that is the game, is discovery. But you have to, people are concerned. What are you doing with my game, right? So we have to say, no, it's still a monster game. So for us, it's just finding that. But I think that's why I'm saying the game, in all aspects of both the good, the cast and the monster, is a journey of discovery that you have to go through. And my hope is that after playing Gears 4, you feel a lot closer to these characters and you care about them more.
What do you feel is your biggest challenge on this game? This first project with your new team, bringing back this IP and really making it your own rather than, Epic's game.
For me, it's just doing right by the fans. That was when I stood up in front of the coalition for the first time, it was about, we got to do it right before we do it different. Because I walked in and people we have a very diverse group of people from very many different types of games. And who had shipped AAA games before, but then so they were like, hey, we finally get our hands on Gears. Here's what I've never seen in Gears, and here's verticality, here's this, here's that, here's that. And there was all these crazy, wacky ideas.
Yeah.
And I was like, guys, you haven't shown me you can even make cover yet. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you need to show me pacing, you need to show me fronts, and you need to show me. And so that was the thing where, to me, it was like, if at the end of it, what we want is this feels like a Gears experience. And that's what we were trying to get across from the multiplayer today, too, is like where we innovate selectively,
right.
and things like the close cover combat mechanics and the weapon designs and the map designs. But what we want to go is like, oh, yeah, Gears is back in on it. It feels good. And that has been the number one mission above all.
Because it's I got to imagine as a developer, especially picking up where a franchise left off, it's got to be kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, right? If you change too much, everybody's upset.
Right.
If you don't change enough, everybody's upset.
No, exactly. Like I'd use this phrase, the betrayal of expectations, right? Like you have to betray your customer, because if you do just what they want, then they go like, I've played this before.
Right.
And they don't know what you're trying to do. And so you have to, if you don't betray it enough, then not good. If you betray it too much, that's not the game I wanted. This isn't Gears anymore.
Yeah.
And so what you want to do is betray their expectations in such a way that those little betrayals become surprise and delight, where they go like, I never thought of that. That's cool. Like that kind of stuff, right? And so it is very much a line you have to walk, where you go like, does it still feel like Gears, but yet, oh, I'm surprised or delighted by these changes.
You were very in the presentation that we saw before we played. You were very careful to sort of connect with Gears 3 and kind of distance from Judgment a little bit.
Sure.
So what is it about Gears 3 that you think made it sort of the one that you're building off of?
Well, I just think if you look at the two, with Gears 3 and Judgment, like which one is the truest form of Gears? And it's 3 as a baseline, because 3 became the purest form of as we polished it from, the cover system was a little clunky in 1, and we shot from the camera, not the weapon, and those things. And so we just kept improving it, and it became, Gears 3 essentially became the best version of Gears. And then you look at a studio that's been working on Gears of War for 7 years, and they go like, hey, how can we mess with this a little? Like, what are the things we could do? And what you see in Judgment is this idea of like, hey, what if we started putting some first-person shooter stuff in? Like maybe changing the controls would be interesting. What about if we did first-person shooter controls or first-person movement and offhand grenades and all this stuff, right? And so Judgment was really meant as a playground, and that was one of the things that, because we thought we were going to make Gears 4 at Epic, and so we felt like, we have the non-numbered version. Why don't we throw some of our ideas that we think we might do in 4 into Judgment and see how it lands, right? And so that's what's been great for us, is we treat Judgment as the experimental one, and we can go and say, okay, 3 is the baseline, but now what about Judgment is interesting that we could potentially bring back? And those things like, they had a smoothness to the movement, they had a speed to the responsiveness that I felt like are things that we could definitely learn from and build into 4.
So it's like Judgment's like the concept album, and now the band. Now you're getting back in the studio.
Exactly.
What's up with horde mode? Because Gears 3, I think, had the most perfect horde mode of
really?
that we've seen so far. I really loved all of the all of the sort of base building defense, tower defense kind of elements built into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're actually like that notion of co-op, that ability, like the playing with friends, is something that we feel is central to Gears. So, it was everything we do. Like we always say, like co-op is the cake, not the icing, right? Because we never cut it. Back in 2006, everybody was cutting co-op, because it was that too hard feature that maybe not enough people used in their minds.
Right.
And so co-op became central to us. It was something we could never cut. And so now we're actually putting co-op into multiplayer versus, where we're saying, you know what, we're going to create a mode that people can go in and then matchmake on the same team and have 5 humans against 5 bots easily. So you can play socially and talk to people and strangers and make friends. You can learn from other players and their tactics. And you're playing in a getting shotgun in the face by really skilled human player.
Thank you for that, by the way.
So and then we're recognizing, when you look at League of Legends, there are people, like 50% of the people never leave bot mode. 50% of the people never go online, and so we have to recognize that some people are going to hang out in co-op versus, and so we reward you with XP and that kind of stuff, so that we don't just treat it as a practice mode. We treat it as a viable place to go play.
I'm asking on behalf of Marty Sleva, one of the other guys who's normally on this podcast.
Okay.
Tell me he needs to know that there is razor hail in the game, because that's his favorite thing about Gears is razor hail.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's just say there's extreme weather in the game. Does that work?
That's a good start. We'll take that for now.
Okay.
Last couple questions I have for you are sort of related. Do you feel like is Black Tusk's other IP completely dead? I mean, we saw it. You're a studio that's built now to make Gears of War games, but we did see a very neat concept trailer at E3, 2 or so years ago.
Right.
Is that done? We're going to hand that off to another studio, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know what Microsoft's going to do with that sort of idea. I mean, right now it's not being worked on by anybody or anything, so it's on the shelf somewhere. But right now, the reason we rebranded ourselves as the Coalition is that we're dedicated to Gears and all things Gears. So
of course,
that's not something we're going to ever pick up.
And on a related note, so do you think now you've come back to Gears of War after a brief journey into the wilds?
You're finding myself.
Do you see yourself working on Gears for the rest of your career? Is that an interesting career path for you?
Yeah, if I'm lucky, that would be great. That was sort of I love Gears of War. I love playing it. I love building it and creating it. And there's a large part of me that's in that game. Like when I look at that game, I see myself in it. So I thought maybe Gears might be it for me, and I was happy with that. And I'm happy with that now. As I look forward and go, like, is this the last franchise I ever work on? I'd be totally fine with that. That would be great. And that was why I got the tattoo, was because it was the notion of this was it. Like I knew that it was not a temporary thing. This is a permanent thing.
I know, I've seen it. Where is it?
Oh, it's right here.
Yeah, let's get it on. Let's get it. Just,
so
we can't zoom in because we don't have it. But yeah,
good art,
it's
but
pretty visible.
Frame. I have a very bad frame for this. So that to me was like,
that's dedication right there.
Well, I guess not many game creators get their own logo put on their body, but to me it was just it spoke to my belief on that I'm Gears Viking, and that's why I never changed my Twitter handle.
Yeah.
And it's funny is that's what people. I walk down the street in New York, and the guy doing the comedy show tonight goes, and Gears Viking, and like that's how they know me. And I realize it's defined my career, it defines me, and I define it, and I love that.
That's great. I love that you're that. I mean, it gives, as a player, it gives a lot of confidence that you adore your own thing enough to do that, because I sure as hell wouldn't put any game on my body.
Get an IGN logo on your
No. I love working here, but no, that's not happening. My wife would divorce me. She'd be just like, clearly you are not capable of making rational decisions. I'm out the door. I've already been divorced once, Rod. I don't want to do it again. It's a horrible experience.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, that's the funny thing is my wife sleeps to my left, and occasionally when I roll over, like the tattoo comes up, and she,
hey, honey,
and she goes, oh God, she's like, that really happened.
Well, the game is Gears of War 4. The multiplayer beta begins April 18th. Do I have that correct?
For anybody who's played the Ultimate Edition, either on Windows 10 or Xbox One,
yes.
If you've played, we'll send you a code and you'll get early access. We're going to roll the codes out because we're not doing a 2-stage like pre-download start thing. We're just, when you get the code, you can play. So,
nice.
Because this is a real beta. Like it's not a pre-release demo.
A marketing beta?
No, it's not a marketing beta. It's a technical beta. We have code that we've never run before at scale, and so our focus is all about launch day. And so it's going to be, hey, we want to roll things in and test servers as the load gets bigger and bigger. We want to make sure the gameplay is right. We want to make sure. So we're going to roll it out. So if you don't get it on 12:01 on the 18th. Relax, it's coming.
Well, buckle up for all those angry tweets. At Gears Viking.
Exactly. And so for the first week is the Ultimate Edition players, and then starting the 25th is anybody with a gold account.
All right, excellent. And then full game October 11th. That's actually, we just talked about that on last week's podcast. I was surprised. I thought for sure that Microsoft likes to give their biggest tentpole game the November slot.
Right.
Did you guys have a say in that, or does Phil come down and be like, all right, you guys are out in October, let's do it?
No, we have a huge say in that because ultimately your ship date is determined by your production schedule.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't be, you can't have the tail wagging the dog. So we go in and we talk about that. And Gears 3 was out in September, so it's not unusual for us to change the time. And it was just from where we were going to be in production and how things were shaping up. October just felt really good, and so it seemed like a natural date to target for us.
Brilliant. The earlier we get it, the better. We'll be happy. Starting with the beta. Rod Fergusson, the studio head at the Coalition on Gears of War 4. Rod, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was great.